Hi, welcome to today's segment of Our Ventura TV. My name is George Alger. Today we're going to be speaking about fake news and media credibility. And our guest expert today is David Comden, who is a former publisher of the VC Reporter and many other publications throughout Southern California. Welcome, David.
Hi, George.
So what is fake news?
Fake news is information that's created by someone to disorient or miscommunicate facts or supposed facts in an effort to sway opinion or change people's minds.
So in your definition, you would say fake news is intentional?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there, especially with the advent of the web. You're seeing people opinionate just about everything. And as you know, some people still think the earth is flat and that the moon shot didn't happen, etc. But fake news in and of itself is an intentional intent to arm people with misinformation, to get them to do something, to think a certain way, to vote a certain way, etc. Okay.
And then I guess there's a number of ways we could approach this in terms of media credibility, but how would you open that topic?
Well, media has gone through a lot of changes in the past 200 years. Back in the day, there were largely newspapers and word of mouth. Then came radio, then came television, then came cable, now the internet. This flattening of the earth allows what used to be a minimum number of voices to now expand into millions of voices with some information, some factual, some not factual, some opinion, a lot of opinion. And opinions are like ears, everybody's got one.
Okay, cool. And yet, even mainstream media, if we look at that as some standard of credibility, does disseminate incorrect information.
Yeah. From time to time, that's true. And depending on the source, again, what I'd like to communicate is you need to know your source. The New York Times, professional, trained, diligent people that work hard. Everybody has an opinion or a worldview that they bring to any subject. But what mainstream media does is they try and present facts in order to disseminate the same information to a lot of people for conversational purposes. As you go down the ladder to less trained, less diligent, less known quantities, they have angles that they're trying to impose upon you or get you to think about things in a different way. If you don't know a source, then you should question, the facts that are being presented. And it's not hard to do. Sometimes you can sniff them out. What I find is educating yourself is probably the best way to determine whether someone or some organization is a factual, good representation of what the truth is.
Good. So of course it makes sense to look at the source to determine some level of veracity of the information.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, would you draw some line and say that mainstream media is representative of real news?
In a general sense, yes, because there's a certain responsibility. No one gets it right all the time, let's be clear. But those news sources that put out a lot of information, have large staffs, are responsible in their reporting and in their reporting of what they didn't get right with corrections and apologies and things like that. Those can be counted on more than just a singular topic website from who knows where with no byline, which is someone's authorized signature, to tell you who's giving you the information. The analogy that we were talking about earlier is if you were walking down the street and a friend walked up to you and said, "That restaurant over there is really good," you have a basis for which to judge that experience and that information. Whereas if a complete stranger walked up and said, "George, I want you to eat over there, it's the best restaurant you'll ever go to," you don't really have a sense of where that person's coming from and their credibility.
Yeah. And regarding fake news, of course, nowadays it's much more topical, and certain folks are even ascribing mainstream media or specific mainstream media outlets as being fake news too. Could you comment on that?
Yeah. This whole idea of fake news really is, in some people's minds, it's World War III. It's disinformation. It is using information against a person, organization, even a country. That's a very serious threat, and we don't know the depth by which people will go to. I mean, we've heard some reporting on how some countries or organizations have teams of people with nothing better to do than create and disseminate misinformation for the purpose of disorienting groups of people or entire countries. So the important thing to do is to educate yourself by looking at a number of sources and comparing the data sets, the facts that are presented by these. Back in the day when there were fewer sets of facts, it was easier for groups of people to have discussions based on those facts. But now, there are millions of sources and thousands of different angles and sets of facts that one has to determine, is that one right or is this one right? It makes it very difficult. So coming back again, know who your source is.
Do you have any suggestions for a person who really does want as unbiased and an unbiased source as possible to look out at all the different areas and try not to use their own personal biases as a way to distinguish which one's better? Because of course the different mainstream media outlets tend to be associated with certain political leanings.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to gather information from a number of sources. The unfortunate reality of what's happening right now, George, is people are siloed into veins of information, a particular website, a particular television or cable channel. And that's what they listen to and believe without investigating all sides. And so I think it's a little bit on the lazy side. We're busy people, we've got a lot to do. But the more sources that you look at, legitimate sources, broadband run by professional organizations, the better. And that way you'll be able to see both sides. It's kind of like being in a jury pool. If you only heard from one side of the argument, you're only getting part of the story.
Right. Do you have any suggestions on someone who might be looking at a source of information that is definitely not mainstream media, but might actually have some information that's very true, and yet it might be in contrast to some other viewpoints, and yet really all you can find out about this person is maybe they have some kind of distinguished background, or maybe they have something that relates to this field, but that's all you got to go with. Do you have any guidance or suggestions?
It's a great question. How I'd answer that is you can do research because of the internet and the wonder that it is. You can do research on people very quickly. You can see if they have a Facebook page or a LinkedIn page, what their reputation score is online. Those people that work in secrecy are the ones to be examined more carefully. You brought up at the beginning of the question, there are very small organizations or people that are very narrow focused in a particular discipline. They may be expert in it, and the value of their information might be very, very good. But you can tell rather quickly after investigating someone whether they're out in the world and above the foam or if they're underwater and trying to hide things. It's not hard to tell.
Yeah. What do you think about media in general? Is it the same in terms of its credibility or veracity? Is it actually getting better or getting worse?
Great question. I think it's getting more difficult because the economic pressures placed upon media. If you go to even very credible sources, in my opinion, the New York Times, Washington Post, etc., you will see sponsored ads. You will see this nefarious blurring of the ad editorial line that existed for decades. And it's hard to tell sometimes to the untrained eye what is a paid promotion and what is reporting from that organization. It's difficult to do. But what I suggest people do is set up 3 or 4 news sources and examine them carefully daily. And you'll see a pattern. Those news sources that are largely reporting the same things are probably telling more of the truth than an outlier that's only reporting one set of facts from a completely different angle.
Big money or politics, there's a message they want to convey which may not be what a reporter is interested in. And yet when you see certain messages coming through on different media sources, one could wonder, okay, is this really the message that's just they, you know, the government wants to hear you, or this business wants to hear? Or would you say that that consistency really is diligent reporters finding out the same things?
Right. That's not that easy to answer, but what you find is good reporters find a variety of sources that will give them information, quotes, etc. If you see someone constantly going to the same sources all the time, that would lead me, as someone who has curated and examined this stuff carefully, to wonder why they're only finding one or two voices that can add to the story or the fact base that they're presenting to you. So there's a wide world out there. There's a lot of people that can give information, and reporters, good reporters, spend diligent time finding those people, examining the credibility of those sources, and then presenting that as color to the facts that they've found elsewhere and are presenting to the reader.
Got it. What you're saying rings true to me. Just look at how they're getting information. But nevertheless, not all of us can do that to the degree that we might want to. And we may also be leaning towards information that tends to agree with our innate opinions anyway. So if we were to look at this whole conversation, I'd say that it's complex.
It is.
And if media, if you can't even say it's getting better or not, then that makes, I would say, more of the, or it seems to be what you're saying anyway, it presents more of the responsibility to the viewer themselves to determine, okay, where should I go in terms of what I believe, which unfortunately makes things more challenging for the viewer too. If they're working all the time and they got their family and they're busy and it's like, okay, I'm only going to watch one thing for a certain amount of time today or read this, you know, I might say it's, I agree with it or I disagree with it or I even think it's credible or not, but this is the information that I have. I
have to tell you, one of the concerns I have for society, our society, is that people are relying on other people to make the decisions, and they're just going along with it. They're not doing their own fact-finding, their own thinking, their own conclusion resolution. And that makes it difficult because following is easy. And coming to your own set of standards is not, and it takes time.
So we're just running out of time right here, but would you say then in the simplest of terms that getting through fake news is really the individual's responsibility?
Yes, I would. And again, I would go back to sources where you have read about editors. Editors are curators of news, and good editors don't take garbage and don't disseminate garbage. Their reputation really means something to them. They have less of an agenda of pushing a particular topic and more about doing the right thing for society.
David, thank you very much.
Thank you, George.
This is George Alger signing off for this segment of Our Ventura TV. Until we meet again.